Where is he? I can't see him.
Look again. He's under. Kaiko's not letting go.
Somebody call 911. Get the divers now.
The panic was instant. The surface of the water was calm, but below it, a nightmare was unfolding. This wasn't just a tragic mistake. It was a warning ignored for years. If this story unsettles you, it should, because it's not the first time, and if nothing changes, it won't be the last. Let's rewind. Back to where it all began. It was supposed to be just another afternoon at Pacific Cove Marine Theater, a perfectly timed duet between man and giant, a show built on trust, training, and repetition. But what happened next would leave over 700 people frozen in horror, and would mark the final day of trainer Daniel Reyes' life. You're watching Animals March, where we reveal the stories they tried to bury. If you believe the truth deserves a voice, and animals deserve freedom, hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and share it to keep the movement alive. From the moment Daniel Reyes first walked through the gates of Pacific Cove Marine Theater in the spring of 2017, people noticed him. Not because he was flashy or loud, quite the opposite. He moved with quiet purpose, eyes lit with a kind of belief most trainers had long since buried under protocol and repetition. He was only 30 then, new to the team, still learning the ropes of live performance. But there was something unmistakable about the way he carried himself. He didn't just train marine animals, he believed in them. He called each one by name, stayed late to observe their habits, even skipped his breaks to study their behavior from the shadows of the catwalks above the tanks. And then he met Kaiko, a towering 20-foot male orca with a body like carved obsidian and a reputation that preceded him. Most senior trainers kept their distance. Kaiko had a history, incidents buried under paperwork and PR spin. He had been captured off the coast of Norway as a calf, ripped from his pod in a chaotic operation that drew protest from international activists. He'd been shuttled between 3 different marine parks, each time leaving behind a trail of tension. But Daniel wasn't afraid. Where others saw danger, he saw pain. Where they saw unpredictability, he saw misunderstanding. He believed Kaiko wasn't violent, just wounded, lonely, misread. So Daniel did what no one else would. He spent extra hours by Kaiko's tank, learned his rhythms, his preferences, his moods. He introduced new cues slowly, respectfully. And somehow, incredibly, Kaiko responded. Their routines began to shine. By 2019, Daniel and Kaiko were the main act, the crown jewel of Pacific Cove. Their signature move, the Sky Surge, where Kaiko would launch Daniel high into the air, became the grand finale. Children gasped, tourists cheered, phones recorded, management smiled. But behind Daniel's steady hands and Kaiko's graceful arcs, few saw what they had become to one another. To Daniel, Kaiko was more than a partner. He was proof that empathy could bridge even the deepest divide. To Kaiko, no one really knew, but something in his eyes had changed, and some began to wonder, was Daniel building a bond or trusting a storm? Kaiko wasn't born to perform. He was born in the cold, dark waters off the coast of Norway, torn from his mother's side before he was even weaned. His pod screamed as nets closed in, their calls cut short by the roar of outboard engines and the crack of tranquilizer darts. He never saw them again. From that moment on, Kaiko belonged to tanks. He spent his adolescence shuttled across continents, from a seaquarium in France to a failing park in Texas, and finally to Pacific Cove. With every move, the tanks changed, but the walls stayed the same. Small, sterile, echoing chambers that offered no comfort and no escape. Trainers came and went. Some feared him, others ignored him. None stayed long. By the time Daniel arrived, Kaiko had already started to change. He chewed the steel gates between shows, grinding his teeth down until his jaw ached. He floated for hours, unmoving at the surface, eyes half-lidded, an unnatural behavior known as logging. Experts said it was a sign of psychological trauma, of surrender. He stopped responding to commands some days. On others, he would circle the tank in tight, frantic loops, faster and faster, until foam churned at the water's edge. In 2015, he snapped at a trainer during a feeding session. No contact, but close enough to draw blood through fear. In 2016, he refused to perform 3 days in a row, ramming the gate to the holding tank with enough force to shake the foundation. The incidents were quietly recorded, then buried in internal reports stamped with words like inconclusive and low priority. Kaiko's body bore the marks of captivity. Dorsal fin collapsed, teeth worn to stubs, skin marred by infection. But it was his eyes that told the real story. Once curious, now distant, as if he were looking through people, not at them. Only Daniel seemed to reach him. Their bond, at first, was seen as a miracle, a breakthrough, proof that Kaiko could be saved, that the park's investment was paying off. But the truth was far more fragile, because no amount of trust could undo 20 years of pain. And deep down, something inside Kaiko had begun to fracture. By the start of summer 2023, whispers were spreading through the trainer lounges at Pacific Cove. Something wasn't right with Kaiko. He had begun refusing food, not just once or twice, but for days at a time. Sometimes he would ignore the fish altogether, letting it sink untouched to the bottom of the pool. Other times, he'd swat it away with a flick of his tail, as if insulted by the offering. Worse still, he'd started ignoring signals, simple commands, slide out, spy hop, bow. Routines Kaiko had mastered years ago were now met with hesitation, or worse, defiance. He would linger motionless at the far end of the tank, or dart suddenly into deep dives, disappearing into the gloom for minutes on end. When he surfaced, it wasn't with grace, it was with speed, force, agitation. His tail slapped the wall so hard that guests in the front rows turned their heads. Veteran trainers took notice. 2 of them, one with over 12 years of experience, quietly requested reassignment away from Kaiko. Another quit entirely after a tense session in which Kaiko breached without command, soaking the platform and nearly knocking her off balance. Still, the shows went on. Behind the scenes, a junior trainer, who would later speak anonymously to local media, filed multiple internal safety reports. Her concern: Kaiko was unstable. The only response she received was a templated email. "Your concern has been noted." Thank you, then came the memo. Just 6 weeks before the tragedy, a document was quietly circulated among senior staff. It was short, barely 2 paragraphs, and marked internal use only. Effective immediately. Trainers are advised to limit close contact behaviors with Kaiko until further notice. Remain on elevated platforms during routines. Avoid water entry unless authorized. But the memo never reached Daniel. Some say it was a clerical error. Others believe it was deliberate. Management worried he might overreact, cancel routines, jeopardize summer ticket sales. There were even rumors Daniel did see it and ignored it, believing, as he always had, that Kaiko was different, that the bond they shared was stronger than fear. Perhaps he was right. But trauma doesn't follow trust. Kaiko was changing, and in the silence between missed cues and slammed tails, between floating food and empty eyes, a warning was building. Loud, insistent, impossible to ignore. Unless you didn't want to hear it. August 9th, 2023. The sun was relentless above Pacific Cove Marine Theater, baking the stadium seats and turning the pool into a sheet of shimmering blue glass. Over 700 spectators filled the stands. Families on vacation, kids clutching snow cones, parents juggling phones and cameras. It was 2:12 p.m., and the music had just begun to swell. Backstage, Daniel Reyes stood barefoot on the damp platform, clad in his black wetsuit, arms folded behind his back. He smiled faintly as the announcer's voice boomed through the speakers. And now, the moment you've all been waiting for. The Sky Surge. This was the grand finale. The act Daniel and Kaiko had performed hundreds of times. Daniel gave a quick wave to the crowd. A little girl in the front row shouted his name, and he nodded in return. Then, without hesitation, he dove into the water. Below the surface, Kaiko was already circling. The trainers on the sidelines gave the signal, an open palm sweeping downward, the cue for Kaiko to descend, position himself beneath Daniel, and with a powerful surge, launch him 15 feet into the air. But this time, something was off. Kaiko didn't position himself gently beneath Daniel as rehearsed. He charged. The collision was sudden, jarring. Daniel's body twisted mid-water, knocked off balance. From the stands, it might have looked like a mistake, or even part of the show. But to the trainers, it was unmistakable. Daniel tried to recover, swimming back toward the staging area, likely signaling Kaiko to reset. But Kaiko turned faster. Without warning, he clamped his jaws around Daniel's midsection and dragged him under. At first, the crowd hesitated. A gasp rippled through the arena, followed by silence. Then came the screaming. The water exploded in a burst of white foam as Kaiko surfaced, Daniel still gripped in his mouth. Blood began to swirl in the water. Trainers blew emergency whistles, threw flotation buoys, and shouted commands. Kaiko ignored them all. He dove again, disappearing beneath the surface with Daniel in tow. Seconds later, he breached once more, thrashing Daniel's limp body like a rag doll, crimson spray rising with each violent motion. The music stopped. The loudspeakers crackled into static. Parents covered their children's eyes. Some ran, others stood frozen, unable to look away. A trainer rushed forward with a long aluminum pole, trying to wedge it into Kaiko's jaws. Kaiko thrashed, knocking her to the ground. It took nearly 7 minutes to free Daniel. When lifeguards finally pulled him from the water, his wetsuit was shredded. His limbs hung loose, pale and motionless. CPR began on the platform as Kaiko hovered near the center of the tank, motionless, surrounded by clouds of red. At 2:41 p.m., Daniel Reyes was pronounced dead on sight. By then, the crowd had already been evacuated, but the cameras hadn't stopped rolling. Within hours, the world would see what Pacific Cove tried so hard to control. By sundown on August 9th, the gates of Pacific Cove Marine Theater were shut and chained. A white laminated sign taped to the entrance read, "Closed for maintenance. We apologize for the inconvenience." But there was no mistaking the real reason. Inside, lights still flickered over the stage, where hours earlier, Daniel Reyes had taken his final bow. Trainers sat in silence, staring at lockers they no longer wanted to open. The pool, drained halfway for cleaning, still carried the faint, coppery hue of diluted blood. And outside, the world was watching. Local news stations were the first to break the story. Tragedy at Pacific Cove. Trainer killed during live Orca performance. By morning, it had gone national. Cable networks ran wall-to-wall coverage, flashing headlines. Killer whale strikes again. Death in the water. Another life lost to captivity. But from the park, nothing. No press conference, no apology, no mention of Kaiko. Just a one-page press release issued quietly at midnight. We are deeply saddened to confirm the passing of one of our team members, following an incident involving a marine mammal during today's scheduled performance. Out of respect for the family and the ongoing investigation, we will not be commenting further at this time. Behind the scenes, Pacific Cove moved quickly, not to answer questions, but to contain them. Internal emails were scrubbed. Safety complaints disappeared from the park's digital server. Staff were instructed not to speak to reporters. The daily show schedule vanished from the website. Kaiko's name was removed from the promotional banners. But the internet doesn't forget. By noon the next day, cell phone videos taken by guests began to surface. Grainy, shaky clips. Kaiko dragging Daniel under. The screams from the stands. The flash of red in the water. Each video is more horrifying than the last. Millions watched in disbelief. Just for Daniel began trending. So did number Free Kaiko and number Shut It Down. By the third day, protesters had gathered outside the gates. Some were longtime animal rights activists. Others were former park guests, still shaken by what they'd witnessed. They held signs that read, "Captivity kills. This blood is on your hands. No more performances. No more death." Still, Pacific Cove remained silent. Kaiko was quietly pulled from the roster. No farewell. No explanation. One day his face was on every billboard. The next, he was gone. Rumors swirled. Some said he'd been relocated to a private tank. Others claimed he was being retrained out of public view. The truth, whatever it was, remained locked behind closed doors. But for many, the silence said it all. This wasn't just about one man or one whale. It was about a system. One that saw warning signs not as red flags, but as inconveniences to be buried. And for Daniel Reyes, that silence proved fatal. Daniel Reyes wasn't the first, and unless something changes, he won't be the last. His death reawakened a pattern, a brutal, persistent one that marine parks have spent decades trying to bury. In 2010, SeaWorld trainer Dawn Brancheau was killed by an orca named Tilikum during a live show in Florida. Tilikum had been involved in 2 prior deaths. Still, he remained the star attraction until the day he pulled Dawn under and refused to let go. In 2009, in the Canary Islands, trainer Alexis Martinez was killed during a rehearsal by a male orca named Quito. Internal documents later revealed weeks of prior aggression. No one acted. Even in the 1990s, a harrowing video, once suppressed, later leaked, showed trainer Ken Peters being dragged to the bottom of a tank by a whale named Kasatka. He barely survived. The tape was hidden for years. The names change. The parks change. But the pattern never does. Dr. Lila Monroe, a marine biologist who spent over 15 years studying captive orcas, put it plainly in an interview following Daniel's death. These animals aren't props. They're apex predators. They're sentient, emotional, and devastatingly powerful. When you strip them of freedom, family, and the sea, eventually they break. And when they break, people die. And Kaiko? He had 23 years of captivity behind him. 23 years of concrete walls, chlorinated water, unnatural routines, artificial relationships. 23 years of isolation, aggression, and psychological deterioration. Former Pacific Cove trainer Mia Ortega, who resigned in 2020, echoed the sentiment in a tearful interview. Daniel loved that whale, and maybe, in some way, Kaiko loved him too. But love doesn't erase trauma. That show was a ticking clock, and we all heard it. The cruelty of captivity isn't always visible. It's hidden in dorsal fins that collapse from lack of exercise, in teeth worn to nubs from gnawing metal gates, in the listless floating known as logging, a silent surrender, in orcas who bash their heads against walls, rub their skin raw, or refuse food entirely. Many of them, like Kaiko, have never known the ocean. They were born in tanks, raised by trainers, taught to perform before they could understand what freedom meant. But there is another way. Across the world, sea sanctuaries, netted coves and natural ocean habitats are offering retired whales a second chance. Not to perform, but to simply live. To feel the currents. To swim beneath open skies. To heal. It won't undo the damage, but it's a start. Daniel Reyes believed in the connection between humans and animals. He believed that trust could transcend species, that maybe, just maybe, we could earn a place in their world. But the system he served failed him. It failed Kaiko, and it's failing countless others right now. Unless we speak up, unless we change the rules, this cycle will keep repeating, and more blood will spill behind glass walls. Daniel Reyes is gone, but his story doesn't have to end in tragedy, because what happened at Pacific Cove wasn't just a freak accident. It was the consequence of a system built on denial, on profit, on the illusion that wild creatures can be tamed for applause. And somewhere out there, another orca is circling a tank. Another trainer is suiting up, believing love is enough. Another audience is clapping, unaware of the danger rising just beneath the surface. But it doesn't have to be this way. Sea sanctuaries are real. Change is possible. The only question is, will we demand it? If you believe animals deserve freedom and that the truth deserves a voice, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to join us in this fight for change. Because silence is what lets this keep happening. For Daniel, for Kaiko, for every life still trapped behind glass.